Hi, I'm Marco from UWcamerastore.com, and today I'm going to tell you something about the new Sony A7s III camera and the Nauticam NA-A7s III underwater housing. Five years after the launch of the A7s II, Sony has finally introduced the A7s III. Normally I mainly focus on underwater photography, but the A7s series from Sony has caused so much buzz that I'm very curious to see how it performs underwater. The A7s III is a full-frame camera with impressive specifications. It shoots video at 4K 120 frames per second with 10-bit color depth. And the 4:2 chroma subsampling and S-Log3 functions provide an exceptionally high dynamic range, which makes it perfect for post-production. It also has extensive slow motion and quick motion features, which are very usable for underwater footage. Nauticam was able to get the hands on the A7s III in an early stage and developed the housing very quickly. So I even got the housing before the camera was available in Europe. And just recently Sony provided the demo unit so I can finally test the A7s III underwater. When shooting such high resolutions and high frame rates, the data stream is enormous, so it's very important to use the appropriate memory cards. The A7s III has two card slots which both accept SD and CF Express Type A cards. I tried it at first with a 2000 speed SD card, but that was not fast enough. So especially if you want to use the quick and slow motion features, you definitely need to use the CF Express Type A card. I used the original Sony card and it worked flawlessly. The camera is powered by the NP-FZ100 battery, which is, according to specifications, should last for about 600 stills or 90-95 minutes of video. I've been using it during dives intensively, and after a 90-minute dive I had a 40% battery life remaining, so it should definitely last for at least one dive. And if you use it normally, I should say it's good for 2 dives. If you make very long dives or use the camera very intensively, I would recommend to change the battery after the dive. The A7s III is a pretty compact camera. It's not much bigger than the Olympus OMD EM1 that I usually shoot with. But even though it's compact, it's loaded with controls, push buttons and dials, so you can have virtually a dedicated control for every function that you need to change. That's important, especially for underwater, as time, of course, underwater is limited, so you need to be able to change important settings as quickly as possible. So let's see how the camera is mounted in the housing, which is quite simple. Here you got the housing. You just open the latches, remove the back, unlock the camera tray. You mount the camera tray on the camera, secure it with the screw, slide it into the housing, secure it with the lever, and just close the back, finish the latches, and that's it. Ready to go to 100 meters depth. Let's take a closer look at the Nauticam NA-A7s III housing. Every control on the camera can be operated in the underwater housing. If we open the back, we can see the inside. We do notice quite a bit of space on the left side. Nauticam did this on purpose. Here's the HDMI connector of the camera located, and with this space there's enough room to insert an HDMI cable to attach an external underwater monitor. And Nauticam even provided the bigger M24 accessory port for it that will accept the new HDMI 2.0 cables. It's very important, the A7s III has a raw 16-bit video output on its HDMI, and you need the HDMI 2.0 to grab all of this quality and get it to an external recorder or monitor. Popular monitor systems are the Atomos Ninja 5 for this housing setup. Another cool feature of the camera is this little joystick. This joystick is used to move the autofocus point throughout the focus area. Very important and very convenient, especially when using fish portraits and you want to have the focus point exactly on the eye. It's a rather tiny control, and Nauticam did an excellent job and provided a bigger joypad on the underwater housing that operates this tiny control flawlessly. If I operate it and I show the inside, you can see how it's done. Even though some of the controls on the camera are rather small, Nauticam just repositioned them and provided very big controls, thumb levers, dials, easy to operate even with thick gloves. You can see the thumb levers for the shutter release, starting video, autofocus functions, playback, and of course the big wheels for changing the aperture and shutter speed on the camera. Everything is operable without letting go of the handles. The NA-A7S III Nauticam housing is equipped with the N100 port system, which will accommodate most of the Sony lenses. If you want to use the very big lenses like the GM 2.8 lenses, or you want to use the Canon SLR style lenses using a Metabones adapter, then you can use a port adapter from N100 to N120, and so you can mount all the bigger dome ports from the N120 series from Nauticam. The electronics for the vacuum detection system are built in standard, and together with the optional vacuum valve, it makes sure you step into the water with peace of mind. When the green LED is lit, you know everything is secure and safe to go down. It's the beginning of December and the temperature in our local waters is dropping dramatically. Luckily there's still quite a lot of macro life around, so I decided to go ahead with the 90mm macro lens and see if I could find some nice subjects. Like I mentioned before, I'm more of a photography guy, but considering the A7S III, I decided to go with a video light instead of a strobe and give both video and photo a try. On the first dive, what I noticed is that the continuous autofocus function of the A7S III is working rapidly, but it creates some movement into the footage. So for the second and third dive that I made with this system, I changed the autofocus setting from continuous autofocus to single autofocus, and that worked much better. Because of the full frame sensor and the quite long macro lens, the depth of field is very shallow. So if there's slight movement of yourself or the subject, and the distance to the subject changes a tiny bit, like a half a millimeter, you can definitely see that in the footage. And 4K footage is so sharp, it's unforgiving. So every movement, every change of focus is visible. When you notice that the distance has changed, you just stop the recording and start a new clip, and that worked fine. When I got home, watching my photos and videos, I noticed some horizontal striping on several images. This bending issue is quite common for modern cameras and normally only visible when filming or using electronic shutters. I did some research and I found out that the front curtain shutter is set to electronic by default on the A7S III. So I changed that setting to mechanical, and that solved the issue completely for photography. Not for video, of course. So I tested some more for video, playing around with different shutter speeds and also with different lights. And lowering the shutter speed solves the issue in most cases. Changing the light was the big key solution. I found out that the bending issue is not occurring at all with some lights, and it is with some other lights. It has nothing to do with quality, nothing to do with brand. It's just the type of LED and the rate in which they flicker that's causing the issue on your camera. The second dive, I mounted the RG Blue System 03 light, and that had no bending or striping issues at all with the A7S III. So that would be an excellent combination. Choosing or selecting the right video light for your A7S III is very important and definitely needs attention. And I think the best way is to actually test it. You can see it right away when you select a very fast shutter speed and you shoot one image, you see it immediately if it occurs or not. A week after I received the camera, I also received the new Nauticam EMWL lens system. And maybe not smart, but I was too excited not to test it. So I spent the second dive using the brand new Sony A7S III, which I don't have any experience with, and the new Nauticam EMWL system. And was able to get some nice shots. The circumstances, the weather is not so good right now in the Netherlands, so it's a bit dark. And of course, the big advantage of the EMWL lens is to shoot macro subjects, including some very nice surrounding background. But it helps if there's some light available, and there wasn't. But though, still I was quite enthusiastic. On the third dive, I decided to go with 90mm macro. With the Nauticam super macro converter on it to shoot super macro images as well, using the flip adapter so I can change underwater between normal macro and super macro. And using the RGB blue lights, everything worked flawlessly. I had the camera set up on single autofocus for video, no more continuous autofocus. And you notice that after a couple of dives you get to know the camera a little bit better and everything goes a bit more easy and smoothly. The housing operates like a charm. Like I mentioned before, the joypad controlling the autofocus points is super. It's very easy to operate. The big gear for using changing the focus, the manual focus on the lens, also works perfectly. And I must say, in most cases, I just use the autofocus of the 90mm camera. It's not the fastest lens. It's typically for a macro lens. Focus speed is not super fast, but it does the job. I had the camera set up on ISO automatic. Let the camera choose the ISO value, and with the A7S III you don't have to worry about high ISO values and any noise in the images. Even at 12,000 the images are clean. So especially for video I would recommend set the desired aperture to get the depth of field that you desire, and let the camera decide for all the other settings, and it works out super. I also played around with the slow motion and the quick motion settings. I find slow motion very useful for underwater footage. It helps, especially when you're not using a tripod system. You get stable and smooth images anyway. For normal footage, I would recommend a tripod, especially for macro. But if you don't have that around, using the slow motion settings will help you a lot. Another very cool feature of this camera is the ability to grab still images out of your 4K footage. You can do that in the camera. It creates 8 megapixel high quality stills. It's not super high resolution, but the quality is very good. And of course you can select the exact moment that you want the image. So you can freeze that very specific moment and capture it into an image file. And it worked out very good. If you want to do that, it's wise to use a strong video light, so that the camera will select shorter shutter speeds and you will get more frozen, more sharp still images. Unfortunately, I had to return the camera to Sony, and so I was only able to do 3 dives with it, but there's a very long queue of people waiting to test this camera. So I was lucky to get it for a couple of weeks. I feel like I've only used 10% of the capabilities of this camera. The possibilities are enormous. The camera is clearly designed for video and has everything on board for that. 4K, 120, 10-bit, 42, S-Log3, and maybe even the most important features, the low light capability is fantastic. You can shoot, you don't have to worry anything about high ISO values. The camera will produce noise-free images at all times. The camera also produces very nice still images. The 12 megapixel photos that come from the camera are clean and crisp. And the ability to capture 8 megapixel stills from your 4K footage gives a lot of possibilities to capture exactly the right moment. The Nauticam NA-A7s III underwater housing is a pleasure to work with. A lot of attention has been paid to ergonomics and ease of use. And all important controls are easy to operate by the big dials, big control, thumb levers, all accessible on the housing without letting go of the handles. The vacuum detection system makes sure that you go into the water without worrying about water integrity, and it gives you great peace of mind. The new big M24 accessory port makes it possible to connect an external monitor recorder using HDMI 2.0 to get the most out of your Sony A7s III camera. For shooting macro videos, I would recommend the use of an underwater tripod system or make use of the slow motion possibilities in the camera. Selecting the right video lights for the Sony A7s III is very important to make sure you don't have any bending or striping issues at all using this great camera. If you need any assistance with that or any advice, don't hesitate to give us a call, we gladly help you. For professional and enthusiastic underwater filmmakers, the Sony A7s III is a fantastic camera with great image quality and extensive possibilities. The Nauticam NA-A7S III underwater housing ensures you can fully utilize all functions of the camera underwater and operate it even more easily than without the housing. Even after a couple of dives, you will shoot some great photos and videos with this set. If you want to discover all the features and try out all the possibilities, you definitely need to reserve a couple of months. Thank you for watching, and if you have any comments or any questions, please contact us.